Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Bruce McDonald, and this is the Talamanca Review. I had a real fun time on the Farcast with Robert Phoenix. I had no idea he shared this love of literature and poetry. Nobody had told me that. We're a dying breed, as is beauty itself, a dying thing. And I don't mean to be cynical, but beauty is one of the attributes of God, even for the atheist and the agnostic. And beauty revivifies us, it gives us life, it lifts us up. And I'm not talking about the crass definition of beauty that has become normalized in our time, which is vulgarity masquerading as beauty. But why wouldn't it be when you think about it? It fits in perfectly with the time we exist in now. I myself, I think a lot about what comes after me and what kind of life my son can have and how my bloodline goes on. It really is a major part of my preoccupation in this time, because I know he probably can't stay in Canada, and ultimately it's up to him. But every effort I make here to bring in revenue is to provide a life for him, because my life is much more easy to maintain with the remote work I have. So the Abaca and the tourism and everything, and this will all be handed off to my son, as well as this house. Sometime in the near future, you may see me podcasting from somewhere else. We're going to go ahead and build another small house here down by my mother-in-law. I've decided that I'm just going to do the easiest and cheapest house I can do, which is prefabricated concrete slides. They're quite nice, actually. They last a long, long time. And my brother-in-law is accustomed with this form of construction. He's done about a half dozen of these houses. And I'll either live there or, it all depends. Anything can change at any time. The curious thing about my son's generation in the locale he was raised, which was southwest Mississauga, for those of you who know the area, basically he was raised around Dundas and Wolfdale. And he ended up going to St. Matthew's High School, and there was another St. the elementary school. It might have been St. Martin's. There's all the Catholic school system. And he had an idyllic upbringing, He never had to walk to school. He never had to bus to school. He walked to elementary school. Usually one of his grandparents took him. My ex-wife ended up moving 7 doors down from her mother, which is quite common in Mediterranean and Latin cultures, right? The family is really important, and it saves a lot of money. I never had to pay a dime for daycare. And I think that my son turned out a lot better as a result of this family care. And most of the kids he went to school with ended up going into the trades as well. And many of them are doing quite well now with their own businesses. And Brandon, my son, hasn't quite hit that point yet, but he's getting close. And so he may be able to do fine and well in Canada. And so it's up to him. But either way, I'm going through with these, the Abacus coming back, and why would I not do it? I already have the hectares planted and ready to cut, so of course I'm going to do Abaca. The main point is this collapsing Western world And I've been thinking about this a lot lately. And I'm going to start with this. And I think this is something I seriously missed in The Devil in Us. But I'm going to try and rectify that tonight in a podcast. Here we go.
This is a national emergency.
Detonator charged.
We're in a race against the Nazis. And I know what it means if the Nazis have a bomb.
We have a 12-month head start.
18.
How could you possibly know that?
We've got one hope. All America's industrial might and scientific innovation connected here. A secret laboratory. Keep everyone there until it's done.
Let's go recruit some scientists.
Build a town, build it fast. If we don't let scientists bring their families, we'll never get the best.
Why would we go to the middle of nowhere for who knows how long?
Why? Why? How about because this is the most important thing to ever happen in the history of the world?
You're the great improviser, but this you can't do in your head.
Are we saying there's a chance that when we push that button, we destroy the world?
Chances are near zero.
Near zero.
What do you want from theory alone?
Zero would be nice.
This is a matter of life and death. But I can perform this miracle.
World War II would be over. Our boys would come home.
That's happening, isn't it?
The world will remember this day. Our work here will ensure a peace mankind has never seen. Until somebody builds a bigger one.
You are the man who gave them the power to destroy themselves. And the world is not prepared.
8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3,
Truman needs to know what's next.
2,
What's next?
1.
We knew the world would not be the same. Few people laughed. Few people cried. Most people were silent. I remembered the line from the Hindu scripture, the Bhagavad Gita. Vishnu is trying to persuade the prince that he should do his duty, and to impress him takes on his multi-armed form and says, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." I suppose we all thought that one way or another.
Looking back now, do you think that our country's use of the bomb was necessary?
I believe that the view which I learned from many, but above all from General Marshall and from Colonel Stimson, the Secretary of War, the view that they had, that we would have to fight our way to the main islands, and that it would involve a slaughter of Americans and Japanese on a massive scale, was arrived at by them in good faith, with regret, and on the best evidence that they then had. To that alternative, I think the bomb was an enormous relief. The war had started in 1939. It had seen the death of tens of millions. It had seen brutality and degradation which had no place in the middle of the 20th century. And the ending of the war by this means, certainly cruel, was not undertaken lightly. But I am not, as of today, confident that a better course was then open. I have not a very good answer to this question.
Dr. Oppenheimer, nevertheless, with all the rationalization, with all the inevitability of the decision that history demonstrates to us, you and many like you who brought the bomb into being still seem to suffer, may I say, from a bad conscience about it. Is that true, sir?
Well, I don't want to speak for others because we're all different. I think when you play a meaningful part in bringing about the death of over 100,000 people and the injury of a comparable number, you naturally don't think of that as with ease. I believe we had a great cause to do this, but I do not think that our consciences should be entirely easy at stepping out of the part of studying nature, learning the truth about it, to change the course of human history. Long ago, I said once that in a crude sense, which no vulgarity and no humor could quite erase, the physicists had known sin. And I didn't mean by that the deaths that were caused as the result of our work. I meant that we had known the sin of pride. We had turned to affect, in what proved to be a major way, the course of man's history. We had the pride of thinking we knew what was good for man. And I do think it has left a mark on many of those who were responsibly engaged. This is not the natural business of a scientist.
You know, in the first days after Hiroshima, you pointed out that the scientists who built the bomb had nurtured the hope, really, that nuclear weapons, as you put it, would lead to new patterns of behavior. Well, why has that hope failed of realization?
Well, I think I may have said that then. I think I wrote it recently. I said two things: new patterns of behavior and new institutions. I think that when you remember the manifest causes of conflict between the Soviet Union and the United States, which have bedeviled us for 20 years, and which are by no means in any conventional sense solved, when you remember the ideological ferocity that animated the post-war communists and that we see now in the Chinese in unmuted form. You think of the anti-communist ferocity with which we met this, the notion that there is a telephone communication between the White House and the Kremlin to make sure that there are no misunderstandings is a damn new pattern of behavior. I think it's something that almost without precedent in wars in conflicts which have such a total character as that between the communists and the free world has tended to have. I think the notion that the United States should be fixing up its its power to fight limited engagements on the ground and in the air with old-fashioned weapons that we hope are a little better than they used to be, not as a step in conquering the world, but as a step in giving a chance to think, to pause, to argue, and to persuade before a holocaust. That's a pattern that I believe is not familiar either. When you think that for years the intellectuals of Russia were interested in France and the United Kingdom and the United States, have gotten together to talk to each other about the problems of armament and the problems of the application of science and the problems of maintaining the peace. This also is not quite something that is familiar. The institutions are not there. The patterns are faulty, frail, very vulnerable. But there is a wind blowing.
Dr. Oppenheimer, from all that you have said, it seems that when you contemplate the future, it is more with hope than with pessimism.
Well,
Or is that an oversimplification that's
yes,
hard
I've tried to talk about the hopeful things. The unhopeful ones jump to everyone's mind. Will the Chinese change their views of human destiny and of the relations between them and us before or after they have the power to make major nuclear war? It's anybody's guess. Will the détente between the Russians and the West survive the strains of this time? Will they survive what's going on in Asia today? We don't know. There are 100 reasons for seeing no hope at all, and I take it for granted that everybody can think of them without being reminded. It's harder to think of anything on the other side, and I have tried to say that however frail and however tentative and however limited, they do exist, and they look to me like a bridgehead to a livable future, but not without work.
Well, you can see where I'm going with this by now, I think. Something irrevocable happened in the manufacture and deployment of those two bombs. Something irreversible happened when we even undertook to create that weapon. Something irreversible happened afterwards. The question becomes, how do you live in a world in which the building block of reality, which is the atom, can be split, and in this tiniest of things is the most enormous energy, and the subsequent production of an inhuman and a completely preternatural substance, radioactivity, which then goes on to pollute and damage an untold area of geography, dependent solely upon the prevailing winds. It's amazing how the most eventful of things are so often forgotten. And I have to offer an apology or a recontextualization of past statements. Look at me weaseling out of the apology already. An apology and a rebuke to those who have not realized what I have realized. And that would include people like the pseudo-philosopher Stefan Molyneux, and here, of course, I'm talking about that one magnificent statistical anomaly, the result of the end and victory of the Second World War. And that statistical anomaly I allude to is, of course, the baby boom generation. We forget that this generation was raised under the bomb. And we have forgotten now. I think that these people you see showing up to debate Charlie Kirk with their postmodern values or masquerade of values because they're not connecting with reality. Don't stop for a moment to think that we live in a world in which nuclear weapons have proliferated to some of the darkest corners of the world, not least of which would be Pakistan and North Korea, China closely behind. And that we have lived in a world after World War II in which our absolute destruction and I think one would contemplate the eradication of the human race is a constant and never-ending reality. Now, there's no doubt that these things existed in some scale and measure in the past. History is replete with stories of defilement, degradation, and desecration. Genghis Khan comes to mind. European warfare comes to mind. William Wallace and the Scottish fight for independence comes to mind. And the doctrine of prima nocturna, first night. Enacted by Longshanks, the King of England, in which British nobility would sleep with a Scottish wife on her wedding day, on that first night. And it's such a vulgar means of establishing dominance over a people. And it's such a vulgar way of letting a people know that they don't matter, and that they are ruled, and that they are governed, and that there are consequences for violating the law of this governance. And therefore people fight. And fighting has been a part of human experience since the beginning of time. It would be good and well if we could escape it, but given the genetics we have and given the natural world we live in, I see no way in which it can be escaped. Decimation is something that has been visited upon countless peoples. But what sets the bomb apart is even as you lay dying, your village destroyed, your women raped and murdered, your children having their heads bashed in with stones. I'm talking about primitive tribal warfare here. Or, if not killed, carried off to slavery or the life of a concubine for the women and girls. And so it is natural for human beings to fight. And in this definition I'm giving tonight, I must concede that Islam is a barbaric culture, because it still practices the old ways. In fact, it's encoded them in their holy books. What you do with prisoners of war, what you do with the women, what you do with the girls. It's codified. It's in the Quran. The Quran is a rule book. It's a society in a book. And it's barbaric. Now, it's anybody's guess how the Western world evolved to the point or to the place or to the position it now occupies. One in which we contemplate the end of life in a very different way. One in which we contemplate fighting in a different way. One in which the majority of people, for most of the time since World War II, have wanted to live and have understood that our desire to live necessitates that we extend the courtesy of life and freedom to other people. But our economic models and the ambition of our controllers, and it's always the controllers, it's always the controllers that bring war upon us. The controllers are not the political puppets that you see. Who the controllers are, I could not say, nor would I care to, even if I knew them. Nor can I even be certain at the end of the day that they are human. In fact, based on what I've learned in the last 6 years working with the various personages that have aided me in the construction of the books I've written, I feel well and certain in saying that the ultimate control of the fate of this planet is not in human hands. That doesn't mean it's off-world. That doesn't mean it's in another dimension. That doesn't mean it's Satan per se. I've heard so many theories. Andrew Bartzis had one, and he said that it was a combination of the inner earth, where life abounds. There's billions of sentient life forms inside the earth. And this I don't doubt for a moment. There are many life forms on this planet that can be physical and non-physical, and this is something that the human race is going to have to learn sooner than later. Because you can't understand what's going on down here unless you understand the scope of it. Unless you have, how can you form any solution unless you have the right context? You can't. There are countless life forms that come and go from our three-dimensional reality and slip into another reality that we can't follow them into. If you were to look at the principle of remote viewing, the idea of a human consciousness projecting itself outside of the human body and going out into the universe and proving that it was there. And this is the key point, proving that it was there. All right, so you go out and you describe Pluto before a satellite gets to Pluto. And you make it public and people laugh at you, and 20 years later a satellite makes it to Pluto. And it's exactly as the remote viewer described it. It's the same thing with time. There are certain consciousnesses that can look at time as an unmanifest thing. Nobody, I dare say, has properly captured what happened to human consciousness after we developed those bombs. Now, if you go back to the movie trailer I played, which was, of course, the movie Oppenheimer, written and directed by Christopher Nolan, you will see that there's this idea that we had to do it before the Germans did it. I will be frank with you. I don't believe any of the official World War II narrative, except maybe some of the landings. I believe that many Canadians were killed in Dresden. I believe that there was a rush of the beach of Normandy that was nearly suicidal because there were Germans with rapid-fire turret-based machine guns, and they had an elevated position, and in a gunfight, the elevated position is always better. Robert Wiegand explained this to me one time when we were chatting on the front balcony. There's something to do with the optics of the human eye in which it's scoping something downhill is actually an aid to your aim. And scoping something uphill, whether you're using iron crosshairs or iron bars as your sighting mechanism or whether you're using a scope, there's an optical illusion that happens with altitude that favors the people with the higher altitude. And so Normandy was nearly a suicide run. I believe that happened. I believe many people, including Jews, who were deemed undesirable by the Nazi regime and counterproductive to winning the war, and a danger to the emerging society, or quite simply unfit for the vision of the new society, were rounded up and put in concentration camps. I believe that. I do not believe World War II was necessary. I think that Germany had made several offers for peace. They were rejected by Churchill. And I think that Churchill is as much a monster, or perhaps even the greater monster of World War II. You must realize that the things I'm saying aloud now are considered almost blasphemous or ludicrous in context to official established history. But we're dealing with a history that would have been affected by and influenced by the likes of Robert Maxwell, the Mossad agent and father of Ghislaine Maxwell, who ran a textbook company. And how we got that commission is anybody's guess. I dare say that there's hardly a thing in reality that you can accept on its face value. Not a thing. But one thing that has been profoundly under-contemplated, under-articulated, and under-examined is the psychological effect of living with the knowledge that it rests within the potential of human behavior to destroy the world and all human civilization upon it. This was the byproduct of World War II. This was the byproduct of fusion and fission. I would be remiss if I did not point out to you, and those of you who've seen the movie know what I'm about to say. Nearly all of the top people in Los Alamos who designed, constructed, and tested the atomic bomb were Jews. Physics was, at that time of history, a very Jewish science. So very briefly, in 1905, Albert Einstein proposed the theory of mass-energy equivalence expressed in his famous equation E equals mc squared. And it demonstrated that a small amount of mass can be converted into a tremendous amount of energy. In 1938, German physicists Otto Hahn and Fritz Strassmann discovered nuclear fission. And this process, in which a heavy atomic nucleus splits into smaller parts, releases a massive amount of energy. In 1939, the Hungarian physicist Leo Szilard realized that a nuclear chain reaction could be used to create a powerful new weapon. Concerned that Nazi Germany might develop such a weapon, he drafted a letter for Albert Einstein to sign and send to U.S. President Franklin D. Roosevelt, warning him of the potential. Now, following the Einstein-Szilard letter, and with the United States' entry into World War II after the attack on Pearl Harbor, the U.S. government launched a top-secret program to develop atomic weapons. And this effort was known as the Manhattan Project, and it was a massive undertaking that involved hundreds of thousands of workers and cost billions of dollars. In 1942, the project was formally established under the command of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and headed by Brigadier General Leslie Groves. Its name comes from the Manhattan Engineer District, where its offices were initially located. Now, the key locations. The project was decentralized with 3 primary locations. Oak Ridge, Tennessee, focused on enriching uranium. Hanford, Washington, designated for the production of plutonium. Now, both of these areas are still heavily polluted. That's a very interesting thing to note, that the byproduct of the work they did there is still not processed as a dangerous toxin. In fact, most of it was buried in the earth in large metal containers that are now corroding some 75 years later. And if they crack, all of that material is going to leak into the earth. It's like a nuclear acid flashback. And then the production of plutonium and the design of the bomb proliferated. In many ways, Israel stole it from the United States. There were people assassinated in the United States for doing it. American communists gave it to Russia, the nuclear secrets. This is the human condition. Now, I pass no judgment on this. I don't know if the world would still be standing in its present form if only one superpower had nuclear weapons, being the United States. But I do know that they're everywhere now. And I do know that they're in the hands of extremely unstable regimes. And therefore we have to ask ourselves in all seriousness, what did we win in 1945? What did we really win? You can see the guilt in Oppenheimer in that interview from 1965, CBS archives. Not a man comfortable with himself at all. I would not want that on my shoulders. I would not want that on my karmic record, what he did. And we're rushing into the same thing again. Oh, if we don't do it, so-and-so is going to do it. Where have you heard that lately? Artificial intelligence? What if it's all a load of shit? What if at the very top they all work together? I mean, why wouldn't they? You got a comfortable life, your kids are... Look at what happened in Nepal. That riot broke out in Nepal because of what they call Nepo babies. The word being nepotism. Nepo babies flaunting their Mercedes and their $25,000 Gucci handbags and their lavish lifestyles on social media. And people seeing it, and they're having a hard time feeding their families, and the young people have no future, and they riot, and they burn down the parliament. Now, what I want to talk about now is this idea of the split. You see, I believe that the nuclear weapon was the product of very dark minds, dark Kabbalists, if you will. I believe that there was a lot of Satanism and black magic behind its construction. It is by its very nature a satanic undertaking. Fire is the element most often associated with Satan. Destruction is the consequence of contracting with Satan. And therefore the entire enterprise can be seen as completely satanic, where satanic is a literary motif I'm using to explain dark thinking, dark reasoning, dark human behavior. Not the existence of a beastly looking figure that has red skin and horns. So on the one hand, from the example I gave you of William Wallace and the Scottish freedom fighters, fighting to own the land and the productivity they yield off of the land, and to escape British rule, and to not turn their new brides over to an English lord to be violated on the day of their wedding, the night of their wedding, and dozens of other reasons why people fight. We can fairly well conclude that the necessity of fighting will always be in the human condition, at least at this stage of our evolution. I think one of the things that bothered me so much when I discovered what Andrew Bartzis was actually doing, and that he was actually attacking people with black magic, and in many instances killing people, with its signature being fast-acting cancers, which would be the product of a relationship he formed with a non-physical race. what bothered me so much about that was that somebody who knew better was still doing it. That you could have that consciousness, the ability to see time, and still have your core being, your soul, descend into the primitive chest beating of a silverback gorilla who defeats a foe for mating rights and then masturbates after beating the foe. That animalistic nature would still be in that elevated consciousness. It was profoundly disheartening and reshaped my understanding of what spirituality is and began the lessons that I deliver on the Talamancar Review, warning you of the necromancers and the numerologists and the astrologers. Now, I just had a wonderful experience with a very benign astrologer, Robert Phoenix. But alas, the case is that most people who get into these arts do so for personal enrichment and enhancement or amplification of the animal instincts of mating rights, territory, and wealth. Now, I say with no pride that I've never really had these inclinations. Look at me. I'm happy as a billionaire in my earthbag home. I wouldn't trade my life with anybody on the planet right now. I created this life. I love this life. It allows me to be productive. It allows me to communicate with people, have meaningful interactions with people. In some instances, change people's lives for the better. I've been highly productive in my creative life with the writing. I've maintained a family. I keep a job or a business on the side with a partner in Canada. I have a full and rich life. And it's a life my son and I built together by building these earthbag homes. This is the bodega, only place I'm allowed to smoke. As I told Santo the other night in an off-air conversation, don't tell anyone a woman tells me what to do. But in all honesty, a woman tells me what to do. And you know why? Because I like serving her, because I know she has my best interests at heart, and she knows that I know that she has the best interests of our home at heart, that I shouldn't be smoking in the bedroom or in the main house where people come, because cigar smoke lingers forever. Now, if I were on my own and I were a bachelor, I wouldn't have the discipline to adhere to those rules, but this is what marriage does for us. It makes us better. But if you take the concept of the splitting the atom, the foundation of our reality, if the atom is the foundation of our reality, and we split it, what does that mean? Well, it means that in the instance of its split, there's at least two realities participating. The reality of the 3D world in which the foundation, the atom, was split, and the reality of the energies that come into the world as a result of that foundational building block of our reality being split. Ergo, it is an inherently multidimensional act. Now, had I known this 2.5 years ago, I would have written it in The Devil in Us, because it's very potent to everything that's happened since then. And if you look at the world now, this motif of split or splitting is everywhere. The building block of our society, the family, has been split. The building block of our society, racial and economic equity or harmonization between the classes, it's been split. Everything has been split. It's like splitting that atom was a magic spell, a magical ritual. This is the psychological effect of 3 generations contemplating the splitting of the atom. And for many people who don't understand multidimensional reality, the splitting of the atom would have been the most dire thing that could have been done. It makes a mockery out of the reality we live in. Why stay moral? Nihilism becomes the order of the day. Because nothing is sacred, we can destroy this reality. What is sacred? God created this world. Man can now, if not destroy the world itself, destroy a lot of the life on top of the world. And who knows how many eons it would take to rebuild the life structure on this planet. That's extremely depressing. And when people are depressed, they drink, they do drugs, and they fuck. It's what they do. And you know why? Because those things are distractions. And I can't help but notice the decidedly Kabbalistic composition of the physicists. And how the rabbis have been telling us, according to their scripture, God is going to destroy this world. How come every time we get a proclamation from the rabbis, it's always undertaken by men and not God? What does this reveal to you about the validity of prophecy? Prophecy is in many ways a plan. I'm going to call this podcast Split. I'm Bruce McDonald, and this has been the Talamanca Review.